and upon examining the statues closer, he was shocked to find spots of color on them. Red pigment on lips, black pigment on hair. This was a sensational discovery. It turns out that our perception of classical art and architecture was indeed completely and utterly wrong. Researchers got to work to correct this historical misunderstanding, and when they published their findings, everyone celebrated them and the work they did. Thank you for watching. No wait, I'm sorry, I mean they started getting death threats from the far right.
Color me surprised. The elite, world-dominating Übermench had an emotional meltdown over the discovery of color in the antiquity they supposedly worship. And it's crazy to think that paint on classical statues was such a problem for them. Color was very much central to every culture in the Old World. The use of it projected wealth and status. Anyone with a cursory familiarity of artifacts from these cultures would understand this. I'll return to this topic a little later in the video, so stay tuned. It's quite telling that all they could do in response to an article promoting the broader display of colored statues was to become triggered over a few key phrases, ones that fit into their narrative of humiliation and weakness in the face of an onslaught of degenerate academics. In losing their minds over the article, they demonstrate their essential weakness. Now, why would I make such a claim? Well, because in my mind, a supremely assured uber race would simply steamroll any pathetic leftist academics pitifully attempting to topple their rightful place on top of the racial heap. The skin tones clearly reaffirm their position in antiquity, you see. In short, they would reframe new information to their advantage, and having done so, they could goose step stage left in supreme confidence. But they didn't. They couldn't. They could not handle their black and white marble safety blanket being found in Technicolor and use it to their advantage.
You cursed brat! Look what you've done! I'm melting! Melting!
So with the snark out of the way, I do have a few comments regarding Adam's own video and the original article that spawned all the hate from the far right.
See, thinkers of the Renaissance period had some relevant ideological problems, discrepancies they couldn't quite resolve, such as humans are supposed to be the highest form of life, the crown jewel of God's creation, and yet we're selling our fellow humans into slavery and working them to death in the colonies for profit. How do these two things fit together? They don't, right? It's either one or the other. Or so people thought, until the emergence of scientific racism. Born at the intersection of the slave trade, the drive to label and categorize things, and the new interest in the classical, scientific racism bridged the aforementioned contradiction.
I'm going to disagree with, or more precisely expand on what Adam has said here, because slavery was not the only driving force to racial ranking in Europe. Students of anthropology learn that the naturalist craze to classify everything also existed in an environment of competition for national prestige within European nations. This gave nations in Europe a new form of prestige to vie over. The English and French were the most enthusiastic of competitors, and each tried to establish the foreheads and brain cases of their ruling elite as the apex of all mankind. I want to briefly demonstrate just how distorted these drawings are by comparing them and their assertions with a few images I bagged off the internet of Africans today, because the angles the naturalists found just don't match reality at all.
And Sarah E. Bond, professor at the University of Iowa, published an essay about the ancient era actually being quite colorful. She started receiving a flurry of death threats from white supremacists.
Adam here has argued that Identity Europa went off the deep end because they couldn't handle painted statues. But I think they were triggered for a few other reasons. The right wing maintains a victimhood complex that revolves around a left-wing academic scientific conspiracy to destroy Western civilization and also to topple the white race. Sarah Bond made several statements that easily triggered that complex. Consider these statements from the point of view that academia is out to get them. And last but not least, the worst thing possible, bringing the wrong kind of people into academia. I have also this nitpick from the Artforum article itself, which I quote here. If Identity Europa, a nationalist and fascist group that uses images of classical statuary to advance their agenda, knew that the statues they're associating their brand with were most likely painted to represent a variety of skin tones, then its members might stop disseminating flawed art historical ideas. Personally, I don't hold out the belief that white nationalists will stop disseminating falsehood because classical statues were painted. As I pointed out earlier, many of the statues on display are very lily white. But there's another criticism I have here. Antiquity is filled with colored imagery, and historians have already had ample resources to show a racially diverse world. They've had this information available for decades now.